Welcome back to Pastor Emilie's Story Hour. This is part 51 of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, the continuation of the narrative by Walter Hartwright. Chapter 8. When I reached home again after my interview with Mrs. Clements, I was struck by the appearance of a change in Laura. The unvarying gentleness and patience which long misfortune had tried so cruelly and had never conquered yet seemed now to suddenly have failed her. Insensible to all Marion's attempts to soothe and amuse her, she sat with her neglected drawing pushed away on the table, her eyes resolutely cast down, her fingers twining and untwining themselves restlessly in her lap. Marion rose when I came in, with a silent distress in her face, waited for a moment to see if Laura would look up at my approach, whispered to me, "Try if you can rouse her," and left the room. I sat down in the vacant chair, gently unclasped the poor, worn, restless fingers, and took both her hands in mine. "What are you thinking of, Laura? Tell me, my darling. Try and tell me what it is." She struggled with herself and raised her eyes to mine. "I can't feel happy," she said. "I can't help thinking—" She stopped, bent forward a little, and laid her head on my shoulder with a terrible mute helplessness that struck me to the heart. "Try to tell me," I repeated gently. "Try to tell me why you are not happy." "I am so useless. I am such a burden on both of you," she answered, with a weary, hopeless sigh. "You work and get money, Walter, and Marion helps you. Why is there nothing I can do? You will end in liking Marion better than you like me. You will, because I am so helpless. Oh, don't treat me like a child." I raised her head and smoothed away the tangled hair that fell over her face and kissed her, my poor faded flower, my lost, afflicted sister. "You shall help us, Laura," I said. "You shall begin, my darling, today." She looked at me with a feverish eagerness, with a breathless interest that made me tremble for the new life of hope which I had called into being by those few words. I rose and set her drawing materials in order and placed them near her again. "You know that I work and get money by drawing," I said. "Now you have taken such pains, now you are so much improved, you shall begin to work and get money too. Try to finish this little sketch as nicely as you can, and when it is done I will take it away with me, and the same person will buy it who buys all that I do. You shall keep your own earnings in your own purse, and Marion shall come to you to help us as often as she comes to me. Think how useful you are going to make yourself to both of us, and you will soon be as happy, Laura, as the day is long." Her face grew eager and brightened into a smile. In the moment while it lasted, in the moment when she again took up the pencils that had been laid aside, she almost looked like the Laura of past days. I had rightly interpreted the first signs of a new growth and strength in her mind, unconsciously expressing themselves in the notice she had taken of the occupations which filled her sister's life and mine. Marion, when I told her what had passed, saw as I saw that she was longing to assume her own little position of importance, to raise herself in her own estimation and in ours, and from that day we tenderly helped the new ambition which gave promise of a hopeful, happier future that might not now be far off. Her drawings, as she finished them, or tried to finish them, were placed in my hands. Marion took them from me and hid them carefully, and I set aside a little weekly tribute from my earnings to be offered to her as the price paid by strangers for the poor, faint, valueless sketches of which I was the only purchaser. It was hard sometimes to maintain our innocent deception when she proudly brought out her purse to contribute her share toward the expenses, and wondered with serious interest whether I or she had earned the most that week. I have all those hidden drawings in my possession still. They are my treasures beyond price, the dear remembrances that I love to keep alive, the friends in past adversity that my heart will never part from, my tenderness never forget. Am I trifling here with the necessities of my task? Am I looking forward to the happier time which my narrative has not yet reached? Yes, back again, back to the days of doubt and dread, when the spirit within me struggled hard for its life in the icy stillness of perpetual suspense. I have paused and rested for a while on my forward course. It is not, perhaps, time wasted, if the friends who read these pages have paused and rested too. I took the first opportunity I could find of speaking to Marion in private, and of communicating to her the result of the inquiries which I had made that morning. She seemed to share the opinion on the subject of my proposed journey to Welmingham, which Mrs. Clements had already expressed to me. "Surely, Walter," she said, "you hardly know enough yet to give you any hope of claiming Mrs. Catherick's confidence. Is it wise to proceed to these extremities before you have really exhausted all safer and simpler means of attaining your object? When you told me that Sir Percival and the Count were the only two people in existence who knew the exact date of Laura's journey, you forgot, and I forgot, that there was a third person who must surely know it. I mean Mrs. Rubel. Would it not be far easier and far less dangerous to insist on a confession from her than to force it from Sir Percival?" "It might be easier," I replied, "but we are not aware of the full extent of Mrs. Rubel's connivance and interest in the conspiracy, and we are therefore not certain that the date has been impressed on her mind, as it has assuredly been impressed on the minds of Sir Percival and the Count. It is too late now to waste the time on Mrs. Rubel, which may be all important to the discovery of the one assailable point in Sir Percival's life. Are you thinking a little too seriously, Marion, of the risk I may run in returning to Hampshire? Are you beginning to doubt whether Sir Percival Glyde might not, in the end, be more than a match for me?" "He will not be more than your match," she replied decidedly, "because he will not be helped in resisting you by the impenetrable wickedness of the Count." "What has led you to that conclusion?" I asked in some surprise. "My own knowledge of Sir Percival's obstinacy and impatience of the Count's control," she answered. "I believe he will insist on meeting you single-handed, just as he insisted at first on acting for himself at Blackwater Park. The time for suspecting the Count's interference will be the time when you have Sir Percival at your mercy. His own interests will then be directly threatened, and he will act, Walter, to terrible purpose in his own defense." "We may deprive him of his weapons beforehand," I said. "Some of the particulars I have heard from Mrs. Clements may yet be turned to account against him, and other means of strengthening the case may be at our disposal. There are passages in Mrs. Michelson's narrative which show that the Count found it necessary to place himself in communication with Mr. Fairley, and there may be circumstances which compromise him in that proceeding. While I am away, Marion, write to Mr. Fairley and say that you want an answer describing exactly what passed between the Count and himself, and informing you also of any particulars that may have come to his knowledge at the same time in connection with his niece. Tell him that the statement you request will sooner or later be insisted on, if he shows any reluctance to furnish you with it of his own accord." "The letter will be written, Walter, but are you really determined to go to Welmingham?" "Absolutely determined. I will devote the next 2 days to earning what we want for the week to come, and on the third day I go to Hampshire." When the third day came, I was ready for my journey. As it was possible that I might be absent for some little time, I arranged with Marion that we were to correspond every day, of course addressing each other by assumed names for caution's sake. As long as I heard from her regularly, I should assume that nothing was wrong. But if the morning came and brought me no letter, my return to London would take place as a matter of course by the first train. I contrived to reconcile Laura to my departure by telling her that I was going to the country to find new purchasers for her drawings and for mine, and I left her occupied and happy. Marion followed me downstairs to the street door. "Remember what anxious hearts you leave here," she whispered, as we stood together in the passage. "Remember all the hopes that hang on your safe return. If strange things happen to you on this journey, if you and Sir Percival meet—" "What makes you think we shall meet?" I asked. "I don't know. I have fears and fancies that I cannot account for. Laugh at them, Walter, if you like, but for God's sake, keep your temper if you come into contact with that man. Never fear, Marion. I answer for my self-control. With those words, we parted. I walked briskly to the station. There was a glow of hope in me. There was a growing conviction in my mind that my journey this time would not be taken in vain. It was a fine, clear, cold morning. My nerves were firmly strong, and I felt all the strength of my resolution stirring in me vigorously from head to foot. As I crossed the railway platform and looked right and left among the people congregated on it, to search for any faces among them that I knew, the doubt occurred to me whether it might have been to my advantage if I had adopted a disguise before setting out for Hampshire. But there was something so repellent to me in the idea, something so meanly like the common herd of spies and informers in the mere act of adopting a disguise, that I dismissed the question from consideration almost as soon as it had risen in my mind. Even as a mere matter of expediency, the proceeding was doubtful in the extreme. If I tried the experiment at home, the landlord of the house would sooner or later discover me, and would have his suspicions aroused immediately. If I tried it away from home, the same persons might see me by the commonest accident, with the disguise and without it, and I should in that way be inviting the notice and distrust which it was my most pressing interest to avoid. In my own character, I had acted thus far, and in my own character, I was resolved to continue to the end. The train left me at Welmingham early in the afternoon. Come back tomorrow for the next installment.